Education. And on behalf of the Institute, we welcome you to our event today, which is part of our Critical Perspectives on Race series. And it's also part of UGA's Women's History Month series, which has been really kicked off by this event. It is my privilege and honor to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Sacha Sharp. Dr. Sharp is an assistant professor of medicine in the Department of Medicine at Indiana University School of Medicine and adjunct assistant professor in the program of African Studies at IUPUI. As a medical education specialist, she serves medical students, residents, and fellows through educational success initiatives. Dr. Sharp earned her PhD at UI Bloomington with a higher education focus in the Department of Education, Leadership, and Policy Studies. She also earned a master's in Education and Human Development from George Washington University. Her dissertation is entitled A Dramaturgical Analysis of Black Women Graduate Students' Use of Social Media as a Space for Reclamation, Resistance, and Healing. Relatedly, Dr. Sharp's research interests include social media use, retention, success for underserved populations, specifically Black women, and Black health equity. Most notably, Dr. Sharp received the Dissertation of the Year awards for both AERA Division J and AERA Research on Women in Education, the Special Interest Group. She is also the recipient of the Indiana University Building Bridges Award for her service to diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Welcome, Dr. Sharp. I'll let you take it from here. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to remove my mask now. I'm behind the plexiglass, keeping it safe. I'm going to also check here. So yes, this presentation today is a little bit about my dissertation. So it's entitled Black Women Graduate Student Social Media Use as a Space for Reclamation, Resistance, and Healing. I've shared my Twitter tagline for you. Feel free to connect with me on Twitter. You can DM me, things like that. I feel like it's appropriate given I do some work on social media. So I definitely read my DMs if you want to connect with me there. So let's see, my clicker wants to start. No. It was working earlier. Okay, so I wanted to share a little bit about the plan first. First, I'm going to share my positionality as a researcher and scholar with you all. Then I'm going to discuss the dissertation research, as well as later share some of my current research projects and allow for questions at the end. If you have questions in the midst of this presentation, I am very open to those as well. I want this to be an engaging space. We were talking earlier about Ren, is it? Yes, we were talking about a lecture. I was like, I don't want it to be a lecture. I want it to be a little bit more informal and comfortable and having this talk. So a little bit about me. As a researcher, I am a descendant of folks that have experienced enslavement in America. So that comes out across in the work that I do. It will come across when you think about the participants that I have for this study. I did a lot of grappling with my Blackness and my womanhood. What does it mean to be Black? And you know, there's a way of homogenizing often, like the Black folks from the African diaspora. You know, we call ourselves Black, but am I from Africa? Am I an immigrant? Was I from America? So I am American, my family is American, and how I identify. I also attended mostly PWIs, predominantly white institutions across, and so that comes across in my research as well. And I am an avid social media consumer. I say that because I don't post a lot of stuff, but I do consume things and I comment on things and I retweet things. And so in addition to that, I'm a mother and wife. I have 3 children. I am a sister. I didn't add that, but my sister is here to share this experience with me. And I am a medical educator, which is an interesting piece because I have a higher education background and folks are often like, wow, how did you end up in medicine? I started there as a doc student. I was a graduate assistant for a department in medicine and learned a lot quickly about how medicine works. And so I'm in an inaugural position as a medical educator where the Department of Medicine was really wanting to focus on their curriculum development, how to engage their students, things of that nature. And at IUSM, IU School of Medicine, there are a lot of higher education folks that work in this space in various capacities, assistant deans of student affairs, educators, things like that. So it is pretty common at ISM. So a little bit of a background, we're moving into the kind of discussion for today, the research. I wanted to share how I came across to this idea. So I was, my dissertation chair is actually Dr. Lori Patton Davis, and I was TAing for her in her identity theory course. And I realized in her book chapter about digital identity theory, it was very limited. And so I was like, I'm gonna use this. I'm gonna do a dissertation about digital identity theory. And it was like, wait a minute, hold up. Like this is, you know, when we're thinking about our dissertation, we should probably take it smaller steps. Do you really want to do grounded theory for your dissertation? That sounds like your entire research agenda, not necessarily a dissertation. And often, when I was looking at the literature, I found that we didn't really know what identity expression was. Like, how do we define this digital identity thing? What are the steps that come before this development process, right? So from there, I thought, okay, why don't I look at identity expression? Let's define what expression even is in a digital space. And then we can move into theory in my future role as faculty. So that was the first thought. And in addition to that, I had a lot of friends on social media that talked a lot, created a lot of content. And I wondered what made them create content? How did they know when to create content? Who were they speaking to when they made that content? So that is, yeah, how did they decide what platform to use, as I mentioned? So that was the impetus of this research of like really nailing down, how are folks using social media? So the purpose of this research is to explore the intentions behind social media use, specifically for Black women graduate students. So you see my positionality coming out. And I was a Black woman graduate student. I had colleagues that were doing this work. I already had folks in mind that I was like, they would be a great participant for this research. I didn't get those people, but I had folks in mind. So I really wanted to examine how they created and contributed, or what they created contributed to their experience in graduate school, and just producing research that uses social media as a data source. I have a minor that's really looking at data usage, and I know how to kind of pull data from social media. So I used the real raw data from social media in doing this work. I took some courses in informatics and library studies and figured out how do we search and scrape and pull data for my work. So that's what I did. So my research questions: how do Black women, graduate students, self-presentations and identity expressions influence their social media use? And how do social media interactions contribute to their experiences in graduate school? Any questions so far? I'm like, I am going to elicit questions. Okay. So I do want to share some key terms. I'm not going to go through all of these, and I do want to acknowledge if anybody has some different abilities and maybe can't necessarily read everything. So I am just going to highlight some, and I'm going to read those specifically. So self-presentations are symbolic performances communicated to others, which account for power dynamics between individuals and signify how each individual would prefer to be treated. Okay. Identity expression are aspects of an individual's behavior, interests, language, and appearance associated with a particular cultural identity. And then performativity is political and goes beyond narrative itself and fully acknowledges a particular point of view. So those are some components of this work that are essential for the research. All right, as far as a conceptual framework, I use Black feminist thought. Okay. So BFT is a critical social theory. I'm gonna move this, I do have notes, just to be completely transparent. So, the cameras and I that, but BFT helps researchers understand the relationship between oppression and activism for Black women and dimensions of a Black woman's oppression and labor is often exploited, and they're denied the right to certain privileges. And so it was through this lens that I wanted to do this work. I also wanted to actively center Black women in my research, and not in a comparative sense. Often when we look at research about Black women, it is compared to their Black men counterpart or their white woman counterpart. And so in this research, it specifically centers Black women. And I also wanted to acknowledge the matrix of domination. And so a lot of folks point to intersectionality work, Crenshaw's work, but I think that Collins' work, it does often encompass that intersectionality when we talked about the matrix of domination. So, when we're talking about the experiences of Black women graduate students specifically, this is the kind of the literature review. We find that they're often racially profiled at institutions that they go to. So there's that instance of Lolade Sinyobola at Yale University, who was merely studying, fell asleep in her dorm community space, and was accused of not being supposed to be there, and the police were called. They're also socially, physically, and psychologically impacted by de facto segregation in PWS spaces. And there's just various challenges that they have to navigate. In addition to this responsibility and home obligations that they have to navigate. So as for the methodology, you'll see I'm pulling from a lot of interdisciplinary spaces in this research. So I took some communications classes as well, media theory classes to really hone in on this social media concept. And I found dramaturgy to be something that connected well for me. So this was originated by sociologists, actually, Irvin Goffman. And it is usually used in plays. So drama being that key word, thinking about yourself on a stage, right? It talks about impression management, right? And so how do I want to present myself so that folks are impressed with me, right? But it also talks about self-presentations. What is that authentic self that I want people to see and know about how I identify, right? So this toggling back and forth and how it happens. Usually people refer to it to front stage selves and backstage selves. I think most people can probably identify with this. Some folks talk about it in a term of code switching as well, where you know, I'm professional, I want to put my best foot forward, I'm going to adjust my self-presentation or with that impression management in mind so that I come across as professional, right? When I was theorizing about this research though, I thought in a social media context, we do both, we do it all the time. We kind of toggle back and forth. I may put a social media post out that is representative of my authenticity. And then I may put one out that's like, oh, I'm looking for this job and I want to make sure that I see professional. So I need to say these things correctly. And you have to factor in the multitude of spaces that exist in social media to do that. And so I always say like my Facebook space is very protected and curated. I invite folks into that space. So I'm a little bit different from my Twitter space, which is public content. Anyone can download and use, right? And so that is a little bit more of a professional space, even though I dabble into politics, I will be clear. And then there is the Instagram space, which is wholly protected. I don't let a lot of folks into that space at all, right? And then I have TikToks and all of these other things, right? So you're just thinking about how I map out all of my social media and what presentations I'm putting forth. All right, so now we're moving into a little bit of the meat, right? So here are my participants. I had 5 women in the study that ages ranged from 23 to 38. Various parts of the country geographically, urban settings, rural settings, all Black women, specifically descendants of enslavement in America, okay? And they were in various parts of their program. So we have Ashley, Sharice, Ava, Jessica, and Nene. all right? There were some, I kind of gave a demographic survey to start this to say, are you a adamant social media user? Like, to what extent do you use social media was a question for them. How long has your account been open? Those different things, because this is a bit of a longitudinal study. I wanted it from the creation of their accounts, okay? I think I'm gonna go into that. Oh, well, let me share a little bit more about that first. So I looked at the life of their accounts, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you think about Facebook, Metaverse owns both Facebook and Instagram. So when you're collecting that data, you're gonna get both, okay? Facebook there were some things that happened during my research where it was found that Facebook was sharing people's data without their knowledge and privilege. So previously when I started this, you could just get an API code and you could go in the background and collect that information. That was a no-no when I started to do this dissertation. So I had to explicitly ask the women to download their data for me to use for these purposes. With Twitter, you can still do that. They have a kind of a survey that you must go through to, are you a developer? Are you a researcher? Why are you using this data? Is there questions? You kind of have to give like you're completing a mini grant where you're laying out all of the things you plan to do. But then after that, they give you a kind of a developer code and you can collect that data yourself. So my participants came to 5 because I had to ask that question. Are you willing to give me your social media data? And understand that it's for the life of these accounts. I can scrape everything from the history. Okay, surprisingly enough, the women were very open to it. These 5 women gave me everything, pictures, music, just everything. There's so much data. So it was very much okay. I mean, of course, I'm a qualitative researcher and I'm always in the back of my mind, N of 1 is sufficient enough for qualitative research. But in addition to that, quantitatively, I had over 30,000 social media posts, okay? So then I did a bit of a content analysis with that. And I thought about Black women, I thought about communities. These are some of the terms that I used. College, graduate school, things like that, to narrow this data, because it was extensive, down to about 1,000 posts is where I got with this. And you'll also notice that the women use different social media in different ways. Facebook is a little bit older than Twitter, so we're gonna have a lot more Facebook data, less Instagram, and Instagram is a little bit less valuable for the type of discourse and kind of thing that I'm doing here, because it's mostly pictures. So I did pull some of the pictures that were relevant, but you see Facebook and Twitter were most of the spaces. So this is a breakdown of my data analysis process. So the first phase was the previous slide. I did that content analysis. I got the data down to a manageable space. And then phase 2 was where I took the dramaturgy, 3 components of dramaturgy: space, actor, and audience. And I evaluated content curation, self-presentations, and identity expressions. And I coincide that to social media content, which is the SMC, and a questionnaire content. So I use a questionnaire because there are assumptions that we make about social media posts that we see. If you're anything like me, sometimes people put down one phrase and you're like, what are they talking about? Let me go to this hashtag and figure out what are they talking about today? I don't know what this means, but I really want to know, right? I want to be in the conversation. And so the questionnaire content was something that I did over a month's time. And I asked specific questions of the women to say, hey, I found this social media post. Can you express to me a little bit more about what you were talking about? Or I had them share a post with me. I said, I'm talking about your Black womanhood. Can you share with me a post that expresses that? I found that there were some inconsistencies with what I believed that they would put out. So for example, some of them, when I said, I'm talking about Black womanhood, can you share with me an image or a post? One woman shared an image of a white woman and she's sitting behind like chaos. or in front of chaos and destruction. And she was like, this is what represents my Black womanhood. And I was like, I would never have considered that that's what that meant, right? So this questionnaire component was very important for me to not, as a researcher, just make assumptions, but to invite them into the research process and correct me on whatever assertions I was making. So I did that first, and I filtered that through this lens of BFT, a Black feminist thought. And from that, I created the cast descriptions. So I'm really putting this out as a play. You'll see, I'm digging deep into dramaturgy and thinking about this as a play. Then in phase 3, I thought about time. So time is another component of dramaturgy. And how I did that was I put all of the Twitter data, because when you pull out this data, it gives you the time stamp of it, the tweet, any hashtags associated, any links associated. So I organized this information chronologically. I had already started to see that conversations were starting to emerge based on events that were taking place in society. And so this really pulled that out for me when I organized it by time, where I started to see, oh, they're talking about Obama's presidency here. Everybody's commenting in the same ways, or they're talking about, other events that are taking place. So that time piece was a factor. And then I took the materials that I learned from phase 2 again and processed that again in a collective sense of their collective experiences through BFT, and I created the script for this work. So just a little bit of, check in, right? Trust transfer, how does this work? I definitely did member checks. I had the women read the scripts after the fact to make sure that they were on board with everything that was there. Also, social media is free, open media source, right? So in addition to the IRB approvals, I had to go through Twitter's approvals. I had to make sure the women were fine with sending me their data, right? I will say, if you're doing this work, IRB is real serious. They're like, I would not want, the person said to me, I would not want someone to pull my Twitter data at all. So I cannot see this being anything but expedited. So that was a scenario, but we went through it. And so the women are able to access their data from me at any time, see the play at any time, and comment and weigh in. Right. So now a little bit about the cast. So I'm going to try to highlight some women here for the sake of time. We have the 5 women. Cherise, for example, uses social media in a myriad of ways, whether to discuss her relationship journey as a divorcee or her journey with natural hair. Again, this is some of the content that came out of that questionnaire. Jessica uses social media and other forms of media like podcasts to get her much needed dose of Black voices and a respite from attending the PW. Right, so these are just a little bit about the women, and my cast descriptions go into more detail about their uses of social media. But this is just a little bit of a highlight. So in any play, right, you would get a sense of the characters. You probably get a program that tells you who the characters are. And so that was a little bit of this. Is there any questions? I see a question maybe in the chat.
That one I'm gonna hold on, but I think we're good.
All right, so then the play. I broke the play down into 3 acts. Act 1 is the unrelenting pursuit of excellence. Act 2 is all lives will matter when Black lives matter. And Act 3 is I love the skin I'm in and wouldn't change a thing. There are different scenes within each act. So I'm going to just highlight a few things here. And I am going to be transparent again. I get emotional when I read this stuff. So I may choke up here. My sister's here too. I'm like, don't start crying to me. Okay. So I want to read this one to give it all of the credence it deserves. So this is Ava. This is scene 2. We're talking about socialization of Black women in graduate school. And Ava says, the academic hoops we are expected to jump through feel like hazing, an obstacle course designed to measure one's worthiness. By these rules, it's difficult to not feel the fatigue is unavoidable and a symptom of the kind of hard work you exert to prove that you deserve to be there. There's a reason that the ethos of academia is cutthroat, publish, or perish. As a qualitative researcher and a Black woman who studies issues of equity, white supremacy, and anti-Blackness in higher education, I'm used to having my work scrutinized and attacked. So this was actually all Twitter in response to an incident that happened in higher education with a faculty member and some of their work being scrutinized as being qualitative. And so this was some of the expression that was coming out. And I will say, I kind of read through the scenes. You see in my dissertation, I create the scenes first and put them out there, and then I analyze them after. So it's a little bit of a difference. It's kind of counter story, counter narrative process here. So I'll let you digest that stuff first. I'm going to try to pick out some of the points that weigh heavy for me in Act 1, Scene 3. This is Kool-Aid and wine classes. They will try to break you down, talking about this self-preservation. So Ashley said, it makes me think of how depression looks different for Black women, how being and doing everything for everyone except yourself is not healthy. I struggle with my own experiences of depression, but few people recognize it because I am still functioning and excelling. I don't feel like I have any time or space to be depressed because I have to be successful, which means ignoring everything that wasn't going well and pushing forward as if everything's okay. And then we move on to Act 2, All Lives Matter when Black lives do. Sharice says, I read the news. This is actually a post from Sharice's Instagram page. I read this news and didn't realize that tears were running down my face. The harsh reality that we live in is not safe. What are we supposed to do? I know I have friends that are in the law, but this shit is crazy. When I see the Black and white cars or the uniforms, I don't think safe. I think death. Hashtag Grim Reaper. And finally, there's something from Act 3, which is about loving the skin that we're in and this power of Black womanhood. This is actually an image of one of the participants themselves. And Ashley, as a first-generation college student and graduate student, it is important to celebrate my achievements. I feel the need to share this image on social media because I think it is important to show myself as a Black woman excelling in education. It's a nice and positive image to counteract some of the negative messages about Black people that are circulating through social media. My caption was, my cup is full, meaning that my success is not simply by my own making, but also through the grace of God. So after I created the play, I did a bit of an analysis of the findings, right? And I determined that these Black women use social media in 3 ways. As a place for reclamation, they start to share values and beliefs about who they are, what Black womanhood means, what that means. They're creating these positive self-definitions for themselves. They're protecting themselves and curating spaces that are safe. And they're conveying agency. So a lot of the literature talks about the types of tropes, right, or representations that exist for Black women. Some of these women conform to those. So one of a trope is, for example, a mammy, right, being this caretaker. And it talks about being caretaker for white families and things like that. But how these women show agency is because they are caretakers for their community. It's not necessarily for, you know, the historical archaic representation of Black women, but they are doing this for their family. They're doing this for their community, right? And that means a lot to them. And so reframing what we're thinking about some of the tropes that we see about Black women, and they're taking ownership of those. We also use it as a space of resistance, right? Even the fact that they're open to expressing negative experiences that are happening to them in graduate school is this resistance, right? I'm going to speak aloud and I don't care who hears, the public, right? About what's going on, and I want to protect some other folks that are coming through, right? Demonstrating civic engagement. So a lot of people during different political obstacles that may be perceived really talked about their engagement in civility. And they celebrated themselves and other Black women. And a lot of them talked about giving grace to themselves and Black women. As you saw a little bit about what Ashley said, right? We need to show that we can be successful and we're proud of ourselves. And then finally, this space of healing, they talked a lot about self-preservation. They talked about depression, seeking therapy, right? And they also talked about their spiritual pasts and beliefs, not only spirituality in a religious sense of their connection to God, but I'm a child of a sharecropper. You know, I do this for my ancestors. This is why I'm here. They're looking down on me and I have to move forward, and that heals me. Okay. So here are some of my recommendations. I recommended that PWIs capitalize on social media as a place to support Black women graduate students. A lot of institutions, in my perspective, are fearful of social media. They don't create rules or regulations around it, and they're just reactive when something bad happens, and then we do something so that we can avoid kind of legal retribution. So no, let's take another stance that's more proactive. And we know that Black women are here, so why not engage them? Graduate programs should develop virtual mentorship opportunities. I'll share a little bit about that because I took that recommendation and moved it forward in my own research. Researchers should further explore digital identity formation, right? I'm trying to lay this groundwork. I'm like, what does this identity expression mean? So we need to move forward in understanding that this digital atmosphere is pervasive, and so folks are using it. What, you know, how are they? And then Black women should remain unapologetic online and elsewhere, being their authentic selves. So quickly, I'll share a little bit about my current research. I am, again, a medical education specialist, toggling back and forth from these higher education spaces to the medical space. My job is very flexible in that. They want me to continue to embrace this social media work while also doing this medical education work. So one of the first things I did was created a virtual community for Black women and Latinas in medicine, because Latinas are also a group that are under-recognized in a medical space. And so we have a group of women, we're on Slack as a virtual community. I offer them resources. We bring in guest speakers. So this is really a space for them. We're trying to see, like, is there a sense of belonging that we can create in a space that can translate to their medical school experience. I also do some health equity work using art. My undergrad degree is in art education. We've learned that medical humanities are very effective in teaching compassion and empathy. So I do a little bit of that. I'm in an interdisciplinary Black health equity coalition. So a lot of health inequities in the Black community in Indiana. And so we are defining what Black health equity is specifically in that space. And we are doing some community-driven work, participatory work, to really impact what the hospitals are doing when interacting with Black members of the community. And then I'm working on a methods paper because people keep telling me I should, and I want to, but thinking about Black feminist dramaturgy. Submitted a paper talking about reclamation of Black womanhood, and I am engaging in work around culturally engaging pedagogy in medicine, because a lot of the education in a medical context really lacks intentionality right now. So that is a little bit about my work. I thank you all for supporting my Blackness and my womanhood, and I am open to questions.
I had a question. Thank you for sharing your experience with. I'm curious, some of the content that you were talking about, so you did how did you take care of yourself while doing this work?
That is a good question. So I definitely took time, right? I had to take time away from the data at points, right? Like I said, I collected the social media data. It's a rather quick process, so within hours to collect it. But then the questionnaires took a month to do. And then I needed to take a moment and reprieve from things, because I associate with much of what's being discussed in this work. And so definitely really emotional, but I think taking a step back, but also understanding the positives that could be gleaned from this work was really essential to me. So I am more so trying to take more anti-deficit mindsets when we're thinking about Black women. And I could have harped on these negative components of this work, but I really took the time to say, okay, but you know, there's bad stuff happening, but they're growing from this, they're healing from different things. How can I be more positive in how I reflect their Twitter or their Facebook comments?
I guess kind of going off of that, like how much context did you feel the need to provide around what was happening like culturally? I know you mentioned like the Obama election, not really also knowing necessarily the years of data collection, but like obviously in the past few years we've seen.
It was from 2012, by the way.
Okay, 2012, thank you.
2012 to 2019, excuse me.
Oh, okay, so yeah, like I just think so much happened in our world at that time that then like, yeah, I guess how did you find the balance between like, okay, I need to provide context for this as something they're responding to, or?
It's kind of like a social media space, right? Like I provided the hashtags to, you know, that they identified or used in their media, but you know, when you're in social media, you're not necessarily providing context to what you're commenting on. And so I really tried to stay true to this play-like framework with like, you could make inferences about like, you know, the All Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter kind of conversation, right? You can make inferences from some of the stuff around, you know, the pride they had maybe when Obama was elected, but I didn't really focus on clarifying those details, and I just tried to center the women and their experiences. Yes.
So I'm going to preface this by saying that I have a lot of questions. So I'm trying very hard to narrow my focus. So just bear with me for a bit. Just a quick anecdote before I ask my specific question. This is a really interesting topic to me for a lot of reasons. One, I'm not on social media, just to be very transparent about that. But I recognize that increasingly so, there are a lot of people who are current undergraduates and of course graduate students. And I feel like a lot of times this is an area that we as a field just don't pay it enough attention to, especially when thinking about belonging and the ways in which students are integrated into campus. I remember having a conversation with the high school student once who talked to me about just their experience in school, but how it was almost ongoing when they left school. Like they're on their phones constantly. And so people's experience is not limited to the physical place. And so with that being said, it makes me think a lot about the work of certain sociologists like Mary Patillo and most recently Antar Mukunda, who've been thinking a lot about placemaking in higher education and how that happens at least in person and through different spaces, sometimes the multicultural center or something of that nature, or even through our extracurricular activities, especially for people of color. With that being said, the placemaking that happens in person tends to involve a lot of intentional work that people have to put in to make that happen. It seems like from your findings, that's also the case, that people are working very intentionally to create these spaces. So I guess where I'm getting at is, what are we missing about the work that people have to put into in order to create these safe spaces for themselves? And how should higher education professionals maybe extend the way that we try to reach out to populations or facilitate this type of belonging that I think people are looking for online?
Yes.
I know that was a lot, sorry.
I have to think about it. Well, some of my recommendations really were just like a presence online to begin with is really important for institutions, right? A lot of folks are avoiding that as a space. And so I think this presence, and it's going to be, it's very curated because of institutions and all of the regulations and things that they have to consider. And that's understandable. But folks are looking for comments on statements, and they're looking for, you know, what is your response to what's going on societally? And I'm not necessarily looking at my email to do that. Like, I want to see that presence on Twitter or on Facebook to know where does my institution stand on particular issues. I think that social media, though, has an ease to which this curating of spaces happens that is different from in-person settings, right? Because of what I was talking about, this front stage, backstage, kind of navigating these worlds and the ease with which folks can do that in social media. So like, I can see posts and I can mute them. I can't necessarily do that in person, right? I can't mute you for 30 days and say, I had enough of that. But you can, right? So I think that this is a little bit simpler in a social media space. I think we have to rethink what engagement looks like as well. I've been talking about this a lot because my medical school faculty are like, oh, Zoom, like Zoom is a piece of this. Zoom is a virtual space. It's a digital place where we're teaching and learning. And they're like, they don't turn their cameras on. Or I don't know, And so we have to start to move outside of the tangibles that we gain from interactions in person and be thoughtful about, am I allowing for that sense of belonging without those tangibles that I'm used to confirm what I'm saying is meaningful to them. So it does take a lot of that behind the scenes planning. And I learned this in the virtual community because the women are not creating content that much. But when I came back and I said, is this still a space that you enjoy? They're like, yes, I need this space. To even know that it exists is important to me. But I'm not going to go moving in and out of it. I'm not going to create so much content for it. And so that made me think we have to really think differently about how we engage people. Seeing their faces in these little boxes, that doesn't mean they're not engaged or are engaged, right? We have to move beyond that and find other ways to assess that engagement that are unique to centering the student rather than confirming for me that I'm doing okay. Like your nods right now are confirming to me that this makes sense, but what would I do if you weren't here nodding?
Yeah.
Right? So I hope that answers maybe the question.
Yeah, I think I have so many follow-up questions, but I'll turn it back to the rest of the group.
Still a lot of time for questions. I have one from our chat box, but I just want to, maybe I'll jump there first. So we had a really great methods related question come in. And the question is, would you have been able to do this project without your background in informatics? And had you not had that background or studied extra, would that have changed your approach?
It probably would have. So a lot of folks that are now, because I'm mentoring a few people on some dissertation committees that also want to do this type of work, but they're doing a lot of interviewing, right? So the approach is to interview people and ask questions about how are you using social media and what are you getting at and what does this mean? And so I was able to glean so much more from just pulling the data straight out. And I will say I am not an informatics major, so let us be clear, but there were some courses that I was able to take that really gave you templates for how you're pulling this data, how you're coding certain information in order to collect everything that you need to. And I think that was really essential to this process, especially when I was thinking about the timeliness of certain works and being able to put this in conversation with one another, the social media posts. So no, I don't think without this background, not only in informatics, but like this media, it was media theory course that I took and really understanding how media functions, how folks communicate on media and all those theories associated. I don't think that I would have been able to pull this together in the way I had.
Thank you.
Follow-up methods related question. First, I want to say how much I enjoyed your presentation and your the substance of your findings, first and foremost, but also the method that you used, which I think is really innovative and paints a clear picture of the cast, and the action. And so my question is kind of a very simple one. Is like, I noticed you have pseudonyms. You had pictures there, and how did you decide? That's what I figured. Yes. So one kind of specific question is, how did you decide on pseudonyms and what pictures to use, and if there's other images that one of the real strengths here is you use so many great images,
Yes.
and what that looks like. And the other one is if you could just say a little bit more maybe about how you developed these scripts. Like for a few of the quotes you said, this is from their Instagram post or something, and others, were you creating the scripts based on your interpretation of the of the media posts and so forth, how much of those are like quoted and how much is this method you writing the script based on your analysis?
Yeah, so the first question, the image is and things like that. So the women, those aren't the women. I just wanted to create a diverse perspective of what Blackness looks in the, as women, and so different phenotypes and tones and things like that. And so that's how I decided there. Pseudonyms were created by the participants, so those were theirs. And then all of this data is explicitly their social media content or from the questionnaire. I did not manipulate this information whatsoever. I remember having a conversation with my chair. She was like, maybe you could just get the essence of what they're saying and communicate it out. And I started to do that. I was like, oh, this is, I think they're saying it. I think it's clear. So for me to kind of try to finagle and get the essence of the work wasn't really working. And so I went back to the women and said, if one were to take this and plug it into Twitter, this tweet may come up. Is this okay with you? And they were like, I put it out into the world on Twitter, so I'm fine with someone finding me in that way, right? Now, not all of these tweets are from Twitter, some of it's from Facebook and other places, but this is quoted directly from these women.
Okay.
Anyone else in the room?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll echo what Eric and George said. Tons of questions here. I'll save them to that. Very minimal and really wonderful work. It's clear why you're getting accolades for this work. And we rarely see such innovative approaches to not only presenting the findings, but the work itself. So this has really been fun for me personally. My question is really broad, and that is, what did you find that was unexpected to you? What about either the process or the main findings that really kind of struck you as something that you just didn't anticipate coming out of this already very novel and innovative research?
Yeah, I think it was about the women specifically. Again, back to the point I made earlier, I made assumptions about how the Black womanhood would show up for them in social media spaces. And that wasn't necessarily true, right? They used different imagery that wasn't consistent with just Black women images to express themselves. I also think something I was grappling with, like especially in the Black Lives Matter section, they were very rooted in Black men, conversations about Black men and those lives mattering. And so, I think that's consistent with society until, the Say Her Name kind of movement came forward, but it's really reflected in that work as well, where they were talking about these Black men in their lives. And not until Sandra Bland did they really talk about, like, as a woman, I'm also experiencing some of those things too. So I think that was pretty interesting in the research. Yeah.
I know you said you have some maybe pending work on the methods and dramaturgy. Are you also maybe trying to go back to that grounded theory that you thought about, starting with, like maybe another version of this, or like, is that still something that you want to explore? Like,
That's super aspirational.
well, I mean, I'm very excited for the, for the methods exploration that is to come. I think the dramaturgy is, just really obviously very creative and like opens up a lot of doors for other ways to approach some of this work. But I'm also interested in, I know you said like grounded theory would become the project itself and less so like the actual topic of your dissertation. So I'm wondering if like there's still more that you want to do with this specific question, but like using different theories or.
I definitely do, especially because there is a cropping of new ideas around social media use. Like I said, I'm on folks' dissertation committees and people are all the time like, oh, this social media thing, who's doing this work and where do we go with it? I wish that I could say that my job has created space for me to really do this type of thing, but like, I'm in different faculty success programs and I'm really thinking through my writing and like, how do I be productive and prioritize certain things? So it's not out of the question, definitely. It's just not necessarily happening right now.
When you got TikTok in there since 2019,
I know.
there's like a whole new frontier, so.
I can't even imagine what I would do with TikTok. But yes, that's a good question. Thank you.
We have one more that just came into the chat box. So a student's asking,
about the medical student group and how they've experienced social media as processing when so much of what they may witness or experience during patient care is FERPA protected? Have they had those conversations?
Yes, I have a lot of these conversations. They're really bucketed around professionalism, right? There's a strong fear of using social media in medicine because of that professionalism and the HIPAA, and, you know, folks getting in trouble because they're showing patient records or what
Right.
have you. And so they just are like, avoid it. However, since I've done this work and since we've moved to virtual spaces and some components of medical education, there is a blur. People are getting on social media a lot more. Like my department now has a social media page. They are talking about, like I wrote a paper recently about tenure promotion and how we can use this influence that we have on social media to factor into dossiers. You know, folks are putting different cases because case-based education is really prominent in medical education. And so they're using different cases and working through cases online. So it's happening in a different way. But there are no rules or regulations around how that's happening. And so I'm very much like, I don't want to penalize a person for their identity expressions. I think us as institutions should really put the work in. So I'm really pressuring institutions to think about what behaviors do you not want to happen in social media spaces so that we can have some structure around that and guidance around that. And we're not, you know, infringing upon people's expression, but they know what to do and what not to do. And I think a legal team can factor into that. But yeah, there's there's a shift to using social media now, but there is a lot of gray.
Right. And we do have time for at least one more question.
So I know you talked about your work with students right now. Do you see that being kind of what you want to continue doing? Do you see yourself in faculty? Like,
So I am a faculty member. I'm tenure track actually.
oh,
Yeah, so that's crazy, right?
I'm so sorry. I didn't even.
But I mean, it's weird, right? Because I'm like a medicine faculty member and I'm like, I'm not a clinician, but I am medicine and on a tenure track going up for my 3rd year review actually this year. That's why I was like, please review me. Give me some feedback. So definitely. And as far as the women are concerned, I actually want to turn this into a longitudinal experience. So these are the women in my virtual community are 3rd year and 4th year medical students currently. And so I would love to continue to support them and follow them through fellowship, right, if that's where they want to go, but also, you know, bringing in more people into this space. And so when I set up this research project, I made it twofold. I was like, you could be a research participant in this, and you could also just be a participant in the virtual community and just get what you need from the space and move forward. And so I have folks that are toggling back and forth in that way. So my sister's gonna be mad because I didn't ask you all who you were and to get to know you and where you, she was like, what are they doing? What are they studying? So does some of you mind sharing like where you are in the process and that, you know, the folks on the computer, you can just put it in the chat, but just sharing a little bit about who you are in this space. You mentioned earlier being 1st year, but maybe some names and things.
Yeah, hi, I'm Julianne. I'm a